Hi, River City Church. I can't be with you today. I'm with my family in Missouri. We're dropping a couple kids off to college. Got one starting this year. But I wanted to say a special hello, just a big shout out of congratulations and hello to River City Church, West Lafayette, starting to meet today to run through and to make sure things are running right at Burnett Creek Elementary School. I'm so glad, excited to see this finally taking shape. I know it's going to make a difference in the lives of many people. Also, I want to ask you to help me to welcome today one of our incredible staff pastors. We have an amazing team of leaders here at the church, and you're going to hear from our student ministries pastor, Jonathan Bull. Every time he talks, people always say, wow, he really has something to say. He's going to continue our series today, Power Paths. Would you welcome him to the stage?
Well, good morning, church. Hope everyone is doing well this morning. I told the first service this, I feel like I need to say the same. Pastor Robbie always does such a great job of introducing myself or other staff pastors. And I just want to say, hey, if we can just all lower our expectations today, we'll all be okay, all right? Well, hey, it is good to be with you. In case you missed it, my name is Jonathan. I'm the student ministries pastor here, which simply means that I get the privilege of working with our 6th through 12th graders, and I absolutely love it. It's hard to believe that my family and I, that we have been here now for 6 years this September 1st, and the journey has been absolutely incredible. We have loved every single second of it, and we consider you guys to be our family, and so we just say thank you to our family for allowing us to just serve in the way now we get the opportunity to serve. Well, listen, this morning, we're gonna continue in our series called Power Paths, where Pastor Robbie has been leading us through this idea of how God's power can move in our life. And so far, we've talked about two things. We've talked about the Holy Spirit, that was 2 weeks ago. And then last week, what an incredible service we had where we talked about worship. Today, I get the privilege of talking about prayer. And I want to say this right from the start because I believe this about prayer. I feel this way about prayer. I feel that prayer is one of the simplest yet most challenging disciplines for a believer. It's simple yet challenging. And I know that seems like an oxymoron, right? Like how can something be simple and challenging all at the same time? And I'm not sure that I can clearly articulate that. I just know that that's how I feel. And I can only imagine that as a pastor that if I feel that way, then it could just be true that there are a few others here today that feel the same. And so here's my hope. My hope is that today, all of us, that we would leave here encouraged about prayer, that we would leave here assessing our own personal prayer life, and that we would leave here inspired to either start praying or that we would continue making prayer a part of just who we are, where it just sort of flows out of us. And so today we're going to be looking at one of my favorite passages and promises in all of Scripture that deals with prayer. And it comes from Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. These are the words of Jesus. If you have a Bible, you can go ahead and open up there. We're gonna get a little cozy and comfortable in our seat today. We're gonna stay in this passage, and so you don't have to worry about flipping so much to other scriptures. We're gonna stay right here. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. We're gonna put everything up on the screen for you. You can follow along that way, and also we have a bulletin or a handout, whatever you call it. You received that when you came in, and you'll notice in the very back that there is a place for you to follow along and take notes. And I want to say this. I say this to our students all the time, and it's this: be a note taker. Be a note taker. Listen, I'm not going to say anything today that's profound, but what's going to happen is that God's going to meet you right where you are. He knows your heart. He knows your life circumstances, and he's going to speak something into your life. He's going to take what I say, he's going to receive it and place it right into your heart. And so I would hate for something to happen today where God speaks something into your life and it's 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years from now, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I remember that one time where Pastor Jonathan spoke on prayer, and I have no idea what he said, but I do know that God spoke something into my life, and I would hate for you to miss that. And so be a note taker, all right? So Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, these are the words of Jesus, and here's what he says. He says, but when you pray, go to your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is present in that secret place. Now, today I had brought a visual with me, and big shout out to Head of Maintenance, Ted Weatherspoon, who quickly on the fly sort of allowed for me to have this up here. But I wanted us just to have a visual of what Jesus is saying. And so what Jesus says, it says that when you pray, that we are to step into our room, and then we are to shut the door, and then we get this incredible promise that says we get to pray to the Father who is in this secret place. And so what I want to do today is sort of talk through that. We're going to break this verse up into chunks, and then we're going to talk through it. But before we do that, I want to give a little bit of context to what is happening right here. So Jesus spoke this verse, Matthew 6:6, during the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is just a fancy way to say that Jesus spoke to a group of people who were on the side of a mountain. It was this like a 3-day maybe sermon that happened. Scholars believe that there could have been upwards of 1,000 people there. Scholars believe that this audience could have continued to grow over the course of 3 days, which tells me that this had to be one of the most spirit-empowered, compelling messages ever given, that they were not sitting in a comfortable auditorium like we are today with comfy chairs and air conditioning building, and nothing wrong with that. I'm thankful for this, but they're on a side of a mountain, right? In rocky and sandy terrain, and the audience is continuing to grow. It goes on for multiple days. There are thousands of people here, which tells me that this was a really good message. And I feel pretty confident in saying all that just simply because Jesus is the one that gave that message, right? And so it had to be a really good message. And so Jesus is giving this during the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount goes from Matthew chapter 5 to Matthew chapter 7. And here's sort of the heart of what Jesus was wanting to accomplish is he has these people on the side of the mountain as he's talking to them. He's wanting them to understand what it means to move from salvation and into the fullness of a Christian life. What it means to move from salvation and into the fullness life. Because how many of you guys recognize that salvation, as thankful as we are for that, it is not the end of the story. Right? It's the beginning of the story. It's new life, new birth, and there's this progression that should be happening in our life where we are walking into the fullness of a Christian life. And so Jesus is wanting the people on the side of this mountain to understand that there's more for them, that it goes beyond salvation. And so Jesus starts where he always starts. He starts with the heart. And we define this as the Beatitudes in the Bible. And so he's sitting there talking to him and says, hey, we got to I need to help you cultivate this heart of mercy and this heart of compassion and this heart of purity and this heart of humility. And then Jesus goes on to say, hey, if you can cultivate a heart like that, then guess what? You're going to be salt and light to a broken world. The broken world is going to be able to taste and see that Jesus is the best life possible. And guess what? If enough people can taste and see that Jesus is the best life possible, then they're going to live in a way that's going to produce a harvest that's going to transform the world. And that was the message that Jesus was given on the Sermon on the Mount. And then we get to Matthew 7:24, where it's like the first recorded altar call in the New Testament. And I don't know if Jesus had his disciples there playing the harp in the background or what was happening, but I do know we had the first recorded altar call. And Jesus says these words as he's finishing up the message. Matthew 7:24, and says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on a solid rock. That's pretty wise. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. And then that sort of concludes the Sermon on the Mount. And then in Matthew 7:28, we have this moment where Matthew is sort of giving the reaction of what happened to the people that are side of the mountain. And Matthew records that the people on the side of the mountain on this day were astonished, that they were captivated, which tells me that there were people that day that were saying and responding that this is the life that I want to have the best life possible, that I want to walk in the fullness of a Christian life. And church, I can only imagine that if those people were saying that's the life that I want, then certainly River City Church and the people who make this home and a church and a place in which we function would say that we want that life too. Which tells me that prayer should be a part of a Christian's life, because our verse, Matthew 6:6, is found right in the middle of this sermon, which tells us how to have the best life possible. And I believe that prayer should be a part of a Christian's life. It should be a part of a believer's life, that it just sort of flows out of who we are. Martin Luther, he says it like this. He says, a Christian without prayer is no more possible than to be alive without breathing. That a Christian without prayer is no more possible than for someone to say, hey, I'm alive, but I'm not breathing. And so what I want to do today is talk through this, because I certainly believe that prayer should be a part of our life. So I want to break this up into sections, the words that Jesus said, and we're just going to talk through this, okay? All right, Matthew 6:6, Jesus begins with this. He says, but when you pray. But when you pray. Now, I want to pause right here. And I know this may seem a little elementary to some, and I'm okay with that, but I think it's important that we define in its simplest way what prayer is. And if I had to define prayer in just this most simplest way, I would say that prayer is talking to God. And that's what prayer is. Prayer is just simply talking to God. Now, I know that there are some of us that have been walking with Christ for some time, or a little bit more seasoned in my faith, and we may be a little uncomfortable with saying that prayer is talking to God. So let me just add a little Christianese and a little fluff to this so we can all be happy. But we can say that prayer is the primary way for a person to fellowship and to communicate one's emotions and desires with God. But if we were to put this in its simplest terms, we could say that prayer is talking to God. But here is the dilemma that so many believers find themselves in. We can identify with the fact that prayer is simple because prayer is talking to God. And all of us are communicators. All of us speak. All of us talk. And so prayer from that standpoint sounds simple. But what we also find is that in the New Testament, there's this rhythm of how prayer is supposed to be. That prayer is, there's this element of devotion, that we are to be devoted to prayer. Like the Apostle Paul says it like this, that we are to pray without ceasing. And I don't know about you, but for me, that's the challenging part. Like how are we such devoted to prayer that we are to pray without ceasing? But I take encouragement because the Apostle Paul also says that prayer is challenging. He says it like this. He says, labor with me in prayer. It's this whole idea that prayer is so hard. So work with me, sweat with me, labor with me in prayer. And so we have this like sort of internal war that happens within us where we recognize that prayer is simple, yet it feels challenging. And because of the difficulty or the challenge that we feel within us, so many believers can shy away from establishing prayer into their life. And then someone comes up to you one day and says, hey, I understand that you're a Christian. Can you do me a favor? Can you pray for me? And we find ourselves in that moment, and then oftentimes our prayer comes out a little bit like this.
Greg, would you like to say grace?
Greg's Jewish, Dad, you know.
You're telling me the Jews don't pray, honey? Unless you have some objection.
No, I'd love to. Pam, come on, it's not like I'm a rabbi or something. I said grace at many a dinner table. Okay. Oh, dear God, thank you. You are such a good God to us, a kind and gentle and accommodating God. And we thank you, oh sweet, sweet Lord of hosts, for the smorgasbord you have so aptly lain at our table this day and each day by day by day by day. Oh, Dear Lord, 3 things we pray. To love thee more dearly, to see thee more clearly, to follow thee more nearly, day by day. By day, amen.
It's one of my favorite movie clips of all time. You know, maybe you can identify a little bit with that. You know, for me in my life, I know that there was early on in my walk with Christ, there was times where I just really stunk at prayer. I can remember that people asking me maybe to pray, and I really had no idea what to say. And when I would get done, people would look at me sort of like the same look that you were seeing right there. Like, what in the world what did he just say? And here's what I understand. The reason that I used to stink at prayer wasn't because I did not know what prayer was or what it had the ability to do. But the reason I used to stink at praying was simply because I never wove it into the rhythm of my life. Like, it wasn't a part of who I was. In church, here's what I think is so important for us to stand, is that no one stumbles into a life of prayer. Like no one just accidentally wakes up one day and becomes godly. No one just all of a sudden says, oh, I know how to pray. But instead, a healthy prayer life comes out of devotion, and it comes out of work and labor and stepping beyond what feels difficult and challenging, and recognize that the God of this universe wants to commune with his child. The God of this universe he wants to have a conversation, and he wants to hear from his children. And so my prayer today is that the Holy Spirit will trigger something in our hearts that will take us into a deeper and more devoted and more authentic prayer life. And Jesus says this: when you pray, when we talk to God, we are to go into our room. That when we pray, we are to step into our room. Now, church, for me, this room right here, it feels nice. It feels peaceful. There's no clutter. To be able to know that I could call on Pastor Adam and the worship team to come up here and to lead me in worship during my prayer time would be absolutely amazing. But it's not reality. Like for me in my life, as I think about like the places that would really be a room of prayer, or places in my house. And I gotta be honest with you, my house doesn't ever feel like necessarily a place of prayer. It feels like a place called a mess. I have a 1-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old, and it is oftentimes that it feels like a nuclear explosion has gone off in my home. It never feels like an adequate place to pray. And so I think it's important that we identify like what Jesus is wanting to get across right here, because I can only imagine that if my house doesn't feel like a place where I can step into and I can pray, I can only imagine that so many of us feel that way despite the season of life that we are in. And so let's just think about what Jesus is saying right here. During the New Testament time, there was a lot of abuse that was happening when it came to the heart of prayer. Many of the New Testament people that we see, they were devoted to the act of prayer. They were really good at praying. They had sort of put that discipline within them, but because they were devoted to the act of prayer, they had lost the heart of prayer. And so for them, prayer had become more about a competition or an opportunity to be known by others. And what Jesus was wanting these followers and these people on the side of the mountain to understand was that prayer is not for the purpose to appear righteous. Prayer is not so that one can gain approval of man, but instead prayer is designed so that there can be an intimate and private conversation that develops into a relationship. So I think it's important that we all grasp the fact that Jesus is always more concerned about the conversation than he is the place. Jesus is always more concerned about having the communion and conversation with his child than he is about what the place looks like. And so moms, please understand that if the house feels messy, it's okay. Like God he just wants to commune with you. If our season of life, if it feels like it's just keeping us from stepping into a place where we can get alone with God, I want you to know like that's probably normal. Like sometimes life just feels chaotic and we don't have a place to pray, but we can find so many opportunities to pray. And it may just be for us that it's in our car for a season, that as we're driving to work, that we are able to pray. It may be for some of us that is when we're participating in our hobbies. It may be while we're working out. It may be while we're at work and in our workplace. It may be while we're just relaxing on the back deck. But I just want us to remember and to understand that God just wants to commune with his children. And that's what prayer is. It's this opportunity where we just step into what God has for us, and we just walk into this room and we just talk to God. Jesus says that when you pray, that we are to go to our room and that we are to shut the door, that when we decide to pray and we step into our room, that we shut the door. And then we get this incredible promise, and it's this promise that our Father is in the secret place, this room that we have stepped into. And before we talk about that incredible promise, I want to talk about this aspect of shutting the door, because here's what I believe. I believe that shutting the door is one of the things that keeps us from stepping into the secret place. Like, how many of you have ever had a door that was difficult to shut? Some of us, right? 2 of us, cool. Me too. I have a door in my house right now that is difficult to shut, and it's almost become like the place where our life functions. It's where we put our car keys. It's where we put our technology. It's where we put all of our like organized files, and so it's a door that we open up all the time, and it just needs a little bit of adjustment, but because I have not adjusted it, it is difficult to open and to shut the door. And maybe you have found some doors in your life that have been difficult to shut. Maybe if you are a middle school, high school student, maybe you're a college student, maybe you're a parent of one of those, and you have gone to shut a door before and you felt a little resistance because there was like a pile of dirty clothes in the way. You've been there? How many? Okay, I see some mamas raising their hands. All right, and so like we understand, there was this one time where fear kept me from shutting a door. This is a true story. I was around 20 years old, and I had just gotten home from work. It was around 10 o'clock at night. I was planning on going out with some friends, and so I got home from work. I went through all the process of getting out my work clothes and getting like just to go hang out with some friends. And so I was getting ready to go out of the exterior door of my house when all of a sudden I open it up and I get it like an inch open, and I sense and I feel that there is an intruder who is trying to break into my house. And so frantically, I shut the door. It was really difficult because I started shaking, and I finally got the door shut, and then I locked the doorknob and I locked the deadbolt, and we had this latch on the door, and so I locked that, and then I did what every grown man would do. I took off running down my hallway into my bedroom. I crawled underneath my bed. True story. I grabbed my phone, and instead of calling the police, I call my friend Brad, who was a country boy that lives just like a mile down the road. Brad does what every country boy would do. He grabs his shotgun, comes to my house. True story, probably not the best of ideas. Brad is on the way to my house, and by this time, I am hearing the intruder becoming more aggressive, and I am freaking out. I am scared. And so I'm like, Brad, you have to hurry. Brad's coming down my driveway. He's being cautious because he has no idea what he is about to step into. And all of a sudden, as he's in my driveway, I hear Brad bust out in laughter. I'm like, Brad, this is no time to be laughing. Brad says, hold on. I hear a knock at my door. So I crawl out from underneath my bed. I tiptoe to the door. With every bit of might and determination in me, I crack open the door and I look. And there's my friend Brad, big smile on his face, shotgun over his shoulder, and he's standing there with the intruder, who on this day was a 4-month-old puppy, scratching at the door. Jesus says, when you pray, go into your room and shut the door. And this command to shut the door is part of the passage that honestly gets me the most excited because it deals with the practical components, or what I want to address today, the practical hindrances or obstacles that keep us from shutting the door. Because what I believe is that a lack of prayer within our lives is not from a misunderstanding of what prayer is or what it has the power to do, but I believe that a lack of prayer in our life comes from the obstacles that stand in our way that keep us from shutting the door. Now, one of the most difficult things as a pastor is to be able to take a message like this and to be able to define it. And when we're talking about things that could keep us from doing something and meet everybody where they are. And so I really had to think about what are some things that maybe we could all be dealing with. And so I'm gonna address it from that area, things that I believe that we as all believers, including myself sometimes, that we are dealing with that keep us from shutting the door and getting into our prayer room. And I would say this, that the first obstacle, and I believe this is a big one, is that most of us are completely unaware. Most of us are oblivious to the fact that we are in spiritual warfare. See, the Bible tells us that when God created the heavens and the earth, that the angels were in awe. That there was rejoicing and there was singing and there was this element of glory that was given to God in this moment. But as we know the story, not all the angels felt this way. There was one angel in particular, Lucifer, who was all of a sudden becoming jealous and anger at the glory that God is receiving. And so he sets out on a plan to dethrone God. That plan didn't work out too well. But what we do know is that in the process is he deceived a third of heaven's angels. And we have no idea how many angels that is, but what we do know is that Jesus says, do you not know that at any time I could call out to my Father and have at my disposal 12 legions of angels? It's this idea of these 12 legions of thousands upon thousands and thousands of angels. So if a third of heaven's angels rebel against God, let me tell you, church, that is a significant number. And the reality is that these demons are now living in the created world, in the spiritual realm that we can read about in Ephesians 6. They're living in this created world in which you and I live. And they seek to devour and they seek to destroy and they seek to attack and to latch onto and deceive. And yet most of us are completely unaware or oblivious to this idea that they are after our children, our grandchildren, that they are after our hearts, that they're after our marriage. And they're after our neighbors. Now listen, I'm not at all saying that I believe that there is a demon behind every bad situation. If you get a flat tire, I say look for a nail. If students fail a test, I don't think they can say, well, the mom, dad, the devil sure didn't want me to pass this test. No, it's probably that they didn't study, all right? If Johnny's on the way to church and his engine blows up, I don't know that Johnny can say, well, you know what? The devil didn't want me to go to church. They know Johnny probably didn't change the oil, all right? So what I'm not saying is that there's a demon behind every bad situation, but what I am saying is that we often don't pray because we are unaware that there are demonic forces out of the things that we care so much about. And since we don't view the Christian life through these lenses, we're never led to get on our knees and to cry out on behalf of our children. We're never led to get into our room or for grandparents to get into our grandchildren's room and to pray that they would be protected, that they would receive salvation, that they would walk into the fullness of the Christian life, that they would not be deceived by what the enemy has for them. And because we don't view like our life through those Christian lenses, we're not led to pray for our spouse, that they would not be deceived, that they would not be tricked. That the enemy would not get a hold of their heart. We're not led to pray for our health or our finances, that we would be good stewards of those things. We're not driven to prayer because we don't understand that there's an enemy trying to destroy us. And I believe that's one of the biggest obstacles that keep us from really developing a prayer life, from getting into our secret room and shutting the doors, that we're just oblivious to that reality. Second obstacle, I believe, keeps us from shutting the door, and that is pride. I think so many of us fall into this idea of pride. Like we buy into this lie that we can control our circumstances and our environment and the world that we live in and the air that we breathe and the money that we make and the success and the accolades and the achievements that we receive. It does nothing but bolster that confidence. Church, I have been reminded again and again that I do not hold my environment and my circumstances in my hands. Let me just explain what I mean. When I was in high school, I had a good friend who was a phenomenal athlete. His name was Greg. Greg was a great baseball player. His position he was a catcher. And Greg had a phenomenal arm. He could throw out any base runner without ever leaving his catcher position. Like he never had to get up onto his feet. There's no doubt that like college was a part of his future when it came to baseball and maybe even Major League Baseball. But I'll never forget, it was in it was in the summer or in the spring of my junior year. I remember walking from my classroom into the hallway and I see a group of students who are uncontrollably weeping. Some of them were my friends, and so I walked up to this group of students and I said, "What's wrong?" And they were weeping so loudly that they were unable to articulate what was happening. It didn't take long for the news to sweep across our campus that my friend Greg had gotten into a car wreck. What had happened was he hit a pole at like 60 miles per hour and immediately went into a coma, and all his internal organs began shutting down. And I remember he was in a coma for weeks after week after week after week. It was multiple weeks that he was in this coma. And I was with him in the hospital. I'll never forget when he woke up from that coma and came to the realization that he would never play baseball again. It's only by the grace of God that he is alive today. But what happened in that car wreck is when he hit that telephone pole, he had fallen asleep, hit that telephone pole, and it just so happened that in that moment of him hitting the telephone, it opened up the driver's side door, and his leg went out, and then it slammed shut, severing his leg from his body in that moment. Plans for him forever changed. I can't tell you how many times I've heard of people who have been in the best shape of their life, the healthiest they've ever been, eating all the right food, working out more than ever. Marriage is a success. Finances are great, but yet they get rocked with the news that they have something like cancer. Plans forever changed. Now listen, do not confuse me. I'm all for making wise choices. Wise choices should be a part of the Christian life. It should be something that we do. But wise choices is not controlling our environment and our circumstance. Wise choices are simply making wise choices. Church, can we not forget passages like Jeremiah 10:23 or Proverbs 24 or Romans 13, where we understand that our life remains in God's hands, that he is governing our steps and he is leading us where we should go. And so let us not allow the air that we breathe and the success that we have and the fact that everything may be going well for us, let us not allow for that to buy into the illusion that we got this and don't need God. One of the biggest indicators that points out that we are prideful people is when everything goes well in our life, yet God gets no glory. When everything's going well with our children and everything's going well with our finances and everything's going well with our marriage and everything's going well at the office, yet we never pause and get into our room and thank God that everything is good, that there is food on our table, that we got money in the account, that our marriage is well, that school is going well, that everything, and God gets no glory. That is one of the biggest indicators that we are prideful people. It just says to God, I don't need you. And when we have this element of pride in our life, it keeps us from getting into our room. Another obstacle, and really this is for all of us, but I'm really speaking to the men, and that is a lack of honor to our spouse. In 1 Peter chapter 3, it specifically says that men who fail to honor their wives have their prayers hindered. And I find this to be so interesting because it speaks to the magnitude and the seriousness of the marriage covenant. And man, can I just remind us that we are called in Ephesians 5 to love our wife in the same way that Christ has loved the church, where he laid down his life for the church, where he treats people as they are worth, not as they deserve. And so, man, if you find yourself in a time of prayer and things are not right with your spouse and you are praying, God is saying, no, you go get things right with your girl, and then you come back and talk to me. Final obstacle, and again, we could spend all day talking about different things, but the final obstacle, I believe this is something that I wish for me personally I could grasp this to the fullness, but is that most of us have a genuine misunderstanding of God's affection for you. Like we do not quite understand how much of a delight that we are to God. I love what Zephaniah says in Zephaniah 3:17. He says that God shouts and he sings and he rejoices over us. It's this idea that God has so much love for us that he can't contain himself, that he just sings over us, that he shouts not at us, but over us. He has so much affection for you. But the problem that's so hard for us to grasp is that we know our true self. We know our brokenness and we know our mistakes. We know the areas of life where we fall short. Church, can I just remind you that as much as you know that about yourself, God knows that too. You have been on God's mind for so long. Like he loves you so much that the Bible tells us in Revelation 13:8 that you have been on God's mind even before the foundations of the earth. And then a long time after that, there was this moment where you were conceived. We'll never understand this into its fullness, but the Bible tells us that during that moment of conception, that God formed and he knitted you together in your mother's womb. And I don't believe that it was this assembly line, this factory process where God is just quickly putting body parts together. I believe it was this intimate moment where a loving father, where he knows every intricate detail about you. This process where he sculpted you from nothing to something. This process where all your days were prepared even before you took your first breath. And it was in this intimate moment where a loving father gives life to her son or daughter, where he experienced such great pleasure, but yet in that same moment, he knew your future. And he knew that your future, that it would be plagued with sin, that it would be plagued with lust and jealousy and anger and deceit and filth and trickery and evil and gossip and judgment and a foul mouth. Someone who was going to bring disgrace upon their body through laziness and an unhealthy diet and harmful substances and sexual activity. And yet he looked at you and he said, man, I love you so much that I'm gonna send my son, Jesus, to come and to die on a cross because I cannot stand the thought of my creation, my son, my daughter, my love going to a place that I created for the enemy. He has genuine affection for you. And that's why Jesus says this incredible promise that when we pray that we can step into the room, and when we shut the door, we get to walk into this room that has the Father who is there. And church, can I remind you that God is your biggest fan? He is your biggest fan. He wants nothing more than to see you win as a mother. He wants nothing more than to see you win as a father, as a husband. as a wife, as a grandparent, as a student, in your career, in your hobbies. All he's waiting is to commune with his children. He's wanting to equip you. He's wanting to help you. But for some of us, it's been so long to receive such direction from God where he can help us to win in the areas of the life that we care so much about, because prayer hasn't been a discipline. We haven't walked into our room. We haven't shut the door. We haven't hung out with the Father who is in the secret place. Here's my challenge for you today, is that you would leave here assessing your own personal prayer life. Do you pray? That you would leave here today recognizing that God loves you so much that he wants nothing more than to commune with you, but maybe there's just some obstacles that stand in your way. Maybe it's one of the ones that we mentioned, or maybe it's something else. I would hate for you to leave here today and not identifying those obstacles.